whoa, whoa. Oh, wow. That was a little bit too small there. All right, I'm still working on trying to get the audio and video set up correctly. I see the comments, I see the complaints, and let's see if it works on this side of the screen. So, look, guys, we got the, I wish it was called something different, right? I wish it wasn't called a golden crosses and death crosses, but that's what people call them, so that's what we're going to call them. And maybe in an alternate universe, they're called something else, like butterfly crosses and cricket crosses. I don't know. But for now, this is what they're called. This is what we're going to call them by. It's not, it's not sort of a to try to get attention to it. It's just this is what they call it. And in about 1 to 2 weeks, assuming the status quo remains the same, Bitcoin will likely have another death cross. Now, it would not even be the first one it's had this cycle. It's actually already had 2 death crosses this cycle. It had one in September of 2023, and it had one in August of 2024. So the point here is not to just throw out the word and say, well, this, is a reason to be scared. It's more so, what normally happens around the quote unquote death cross. Now, if you're not familiar with the death cross, it's basically just, generally speaking, it's just when a shorter term moving average goes below a longer term moving average, kind of suggesting that momentum has started to flip a little bit. A lot of people look at it whenever the 50-day SMA or simple moving average crosses below the 200-day SMA. That is likely going to occur within a week or two. And the reason I'm making this video now is because I like to make the videos about these death crosses and golden crosses before they actually occur. Because usually what happens is this, right? And we talked about it last year. We talked about it the year before. We'll talk about it again, right? Why not? Nothing else is going on in the cryptoverse, right? What the hell else are we going to talk about? So what normally happens, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but what normally happens is Bitcoin goes into some longer drawn out period where the price trends down, right? You can see that in 2024, and then you can see it in 2023. And then it leads to these moving averages converging back together, okay? Now, the thing that you should be aware of, and I don't have a crystal ball, but we have talked a little bit before about there might be some uncertainty going into the tariffs and the macro data in early to mid-April. What can often happen is some type of drop before the death cross occurs, right? Just before it. And then when it happens, everyone starts screaming, the death cross is here. And then what normally happens after the death cross is the market then gets a rally. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's just the way the market has historically worked. Let's go through a few examples and try to figure out, what might happen here. If you just look back at the death cross that happened last year, there were certainly some lows put in at various points, but just before the death cross occurred, right? Just before the death cross occurred in early August, the market sold off, right? And it actually, it hit a low about 3 days before the death cross, okay? So then everyone was sitting here in early August talking about the death cross, right? Talking about the death cross. But we knew back then that a lot of times the market likes to sort of rally into or either on the other side of the death cross. But oftentimes there's a drop just before it, right? Just before it. And that's what happened, right? That's what happened. We got our, we talked back in March of 2024 about getting, basically somewhere between a 6 to 9 month downturn in the market. It's hard to know exactly how long, but about 6 to 9 months before we would break through this structure, right? And I don't remember exactly how long it was, but from this high to when we really durably broke through, you could argue it was about 230 days, right? So you're talking about approximately 6 months or so. Now, the year before, we had a death cross as well. And what you'll notice is that the market sold off just before it, and then basically the day the death cross occurred, then the market got started to move back up. Now, why is this important? Now, look, guys, at the end of the day, no one has a crystal ball, right? I don't certainly have one. But one of the interesting things about this whole thing is that there was a low set, basically the day of the death cross in 2023, that then held for the rest of the year, and so far for the entire cycle. And then just a few days before the one in August of 2024, that set a low that was ultimately held for a while. So this is kind of what I think about, the cycle and whatnot, and and a lot of people have asked me about right translated cycles or left translated cycles, and is it just lagging the money supply and whatnot? This is what I think. I think that the main window of weakness that we talked about was between February OPEX and March OPEX, right? We talked about that a lot going into it, right? We're like, look, guys, there's going to be a window of weakness. The market's just not going to do that great. And it could persist, right? It could persist into mid-April if it wants to follow some of the prior patterns. But a lot of times you'll find some low in March. It can persist a little bit longer, if there's some reason for it. And maybe it's the inflation data. Maybe it's the tariffs. I don't know. But what I do know is that the last 2 years, there was a low set sometime around the death cross. Now, the main difference between this one and those two is that those occurred in the third quarter of the year. And the third quarter of the year is notoriously weak. For instance, if you look at Bitcoin, the two worst months that it historically has are what? I think August and September, right? August and September, that sounds about right. Look at monthly returns. Look at the average. On average, going back to 2010, the only months that are red for Bitcoin, on average, are August and September. Now, the standard deviations are high. Get off my back. I get it. It's crypto. Welcome to crypto. But August and September are notoriously bad for crypto. Not everyone, right? In fact, we had a couple of Septembers where the market did okay. But on average, August and September doesn't really do that great. I mean, last 2 Augusts, we had negative 12% drops. So when we look at something like this and sort of the structure of the market, what I generally think is that you have to remember that post-halving years, seasonality can often be different. Okay? So what I'm kind of thinking right now, and sort of looking at the death cross, right? What I'm kind of thinking right now, we've had a lot of weakness in Q1. Ton of weakness by Bitcoin in Q1. And if you look at quarterly returns, yeah, I mean, we only got a few days left and Bitcoin's down 8% for the quarter. In 2017, it was up 8% for the quarter, about 8 to 9%. So at least so far, Bitcoin has been stuck in traffic on Struggle Street. Even in 2017, January and March didn't do that well. February did much better than February of 2025. What I could see happening, is a pullback into the death cross, at which point, whatever low that ends up being will be instrumental to understanding, what the rest of the cycle holds. Okay? Now, the reason I say that is not really so much due to, these moves over here. It's more so due to the bull market support band, right? If you look at the bull market support band for Bitcoin, one of the things that I've, noticed many times in the past is that a lot of times when Bitcoin falls below the bull market support band, the first attempt can be a rejection. Now, not always, and sometimes even the first attempt gets slightly above it, but a lot of times the market then has another sort of weakness period, not too far off, after that first attempt. Even over here, you can see there's a wick up and then it sold back off, swept the lows, and then went up again. If you go back to 2019, right? I mean, after it dropped below the bull market support band, it went up and then ultimately faded sort of to a slightly lower low below the 50-week moving average, which right now it's still above the 50-week moving average. If this is 2019-esque, then, what if we're here? Like, what if we're just kind of like right here? And that's what's going on. We're sort of just above that 50-week moving average. And the market's trying to get back above the bull market support band. It's obviously having some difficulty doing it right now. And it doesn't mean that it can't go higher into it. But I wonder, with sort of the looming death cross that we're sort of looking at here in a week or two, I wonder if there's going to be like another sell-off just before that. And then everyone's going to be like, oh, crap, we have death cross. And then maybe that ends up marking a low for a little while. And I do wonder if that's how this is ultimately going to play out. A lot of people have made the comparison to the global money supply and whatnot. Like if you look at global M2, if I can find it on here, one of the things you'll notice about that is that it actually did exactly what I'm potentially describing that Bitcoin might do, right? Where it gets this drop and then it rallies back up to the bull market support band and then it comes back down and then it goes back up. So what I think truly is that, ultimately you're going to be better off coming up with a DCA strategy according to risk levels rather than trying to time the market. But I'm just spitballing here. I wonder if this is going to play out like prior death crosses where, you get a little bit of a rally before the death cross, but then it sort of drops just before the death cross occurs. Kind of like it did in 2023 right here. Because it got a rally before it, and then it dropped again. And 2024 right here, right? You can see it got this rally, but then it dropped right into that death cross. I wonder if we're going to see something like that here happen one more time. But the issue is that we still always have to contend with potential weakness in Q3. Now, a lot of times in post-halving years, obviously 2021 was the exception because Q1 was so strong. But in 2017, we actually saw more strength in the second quarter than the first quarter, right? So the second quarter was actually stronger than the first quarter. So what I'm thinking, and I got to be honest, guys, I mean, there is elements of my view here that is deterministic, right? I do more or less subscribe to the idea that there will be a major low in the market in late 2026. I mean, that's kind of my baseline thinking in line with prior cycle lows that we've seen. I just kind of think that, approximately every 4 years, you get some type of major cycle bottom. And this is not new to crypto, right? It's not like Bitcoin invented this. If you go back and look at the S&P 500, it does the same exact thing, especially if you look in prior cycles. Like, it'll set lows approximately every 4 years, right? I mean, this is 1966, 1970, 1974, 1978, right? This is a common thing that happens in the market. 1980, right? I mean, approximately, not 1970, no, I meant 1982, right? But you have 74, 78, you had a recession in 1980, and then you also, guess what, had another low in 1982, the midterm year. So I am operating somewhat deterministically here, that there will be sort of a major cycle low potentially sometime in 2026. I think the big question to answer now is, will Bitcoin go, is the cycle over, right? Like, will Bitcoin get a new all-time high before all that begins? And I mean, obviously the elephant in the room is that, we've had an inverted yield curve forever. And it's not like that hard to imagine the narrative associated with it, right? I mean, even back in the 70s, we had sort of a right translated cycle, and then we had lows that occurred 4 years later. The big question now for me is going to be dependent on, it's sort of an if-then statement. First of all, maybe there is no more weakness in the market, And all the weakness was, sort of capture between February options expiration and March options expiration, which is what I said was the main window of weakness, right? I mean, to hope for further weakness here is a little bit, it's not as easy of a case to sell as it was back in sort of January and February, right? With the new administration taking over and just knowing there's going to be uncertainty around that and the pricing in of perfection. Okay, at some point, the tariff discussions will die down. And at some point, as long as the labor market doesn't just collapse, the market could start to trend up again and maybe sentiment will improve. But I wonder, in this case, if, and I've said this before, right? If in the next pullback, whenever that is, right? If it's before the death cross, so be it. If it's not, but if there's another pullback, if it holds above 73K, if it holds above 73K, then there's no guarantee with the market, but it would suggest, right? It would suggest that the structure of the market remains intact. Because if you look at 2017, you'll note that, it had a pretty similar pullback, right? Where in early 2017, it got a pullback and it ultimately basically tested the 2016 high. So I could envision a scenario where it just simply tests the 2024 high and it still be a market structure that is intact, right? That's what it did in 2017. So maybe it'll do that again. If that happens, then I think you still would, there still would be generally, I think there's a good chance that there would be parts of Q2 that are much more optimistic and invigorating than what we've seen in Q1, right? At least for Bitcoin. I'm not talking about your alts, but even if in another pullback, even if it comes down here to back test this, which I mean is always a possibility, right? I mean, it seems like at some point it will test that, whether it's now or in 8 months, right? I don't know. It seems like at some point it'll probably test it. If it goes that low, then I would probably, unfortunately, I probably would start to operate somewhat deterministically and think that the next move out of that would be a macro lower high. So it could be something like this where, if it comes back down here, you would still likely get a big rally in Q2, but then it would be a macro lower high Q3 and then down into Q4. If it holds here, right? If it holds here, then I don't really think the structure of the market is broken in the same way. The problem with going into the 60s is that, at least in my view, especially the low 60s, is just that it would kind of break the structure of the market, right? And also, it would be too similar to me to what happened with the QQQ, right? And I've talked about that a lot, but basically we saw the QQQ go on this rally back in 1999. It rallied for 54 weeks. It then dropped from 120 down to 63. And then it got a rally for about 4 months or so into like August. And it was a macro lower high. And then we went into a recession. So that's why I'm saying, like, and it's still like an if-then statement. As long as 73K holds, then I think the structure of the market is intact. If it doesn't hold, then it kind of brings into question, all right, well, is something else going on? And I don't think it's Bitcoin related. I mean, you'll notice that I am actually pretty, I think Bitcoin is a great asset long term. I think the reason it's dropped is because the S&P is dropping, right? It's not because Bitcoin is inherently bad. I mean, the reason it's dropped from up here down here, just overlay the S&P 500 onto it, and you'll see it's basically the same chart, right? Bitcoin just operates as a more volatile version of the S&P 500 and risk assets a lot of times, right? So Bitcoin's not dropping by itself, right? It's dropping with risk assets in general. And so, going back to what I was previously mentioning is with the death cross coming up, possible the low's already in, right? It's possible. I don't want to get too greedy and sort of demand that it has to go lower, especially considering that the weakness already played out during the main time frame that we discussed of February OPEX to March OPEX. With that said, you can see that there's plenty of times where there's a sell-off just before the death cross, right? Just before it. And I just want people to recognize that if it happens again, it could be kind of a scary time, but to remember what has previously happened when that occurred, right? Even here, right? There was sort of a sell-off. There was a death cross right there. There was a sell-off into it. And then that ended up marking the low, right? That ended up marking the low for a while. Even in 2019, right? We had a death cross right here. Guess what happened? There was a sell-off into it, and that ended up marking the low. Not for as long, but there was a pretty nice rally on the other side of that death cross low, right? Pretty nice rally on the other side of it. And so the question, right, I mean, is if, let's suppose there is a death cross low, right, where it goes below 77K or whatever, 676, whatever it went to, right? Is it able to go to a new high like 2021, or does it go to a lower high like 2019? The answer to that question, as I said, I think depends on, well, if there is a sell-off into the death cross, it depends on how low it goes. It depends on how low it goes. If it gives back all of this to the low 60s, that doesn't really bode that well. Now, it might bode well for a great counter trend rally in Q2 and Q3, but I don't really think it would bode that well. If it holds at either, say, a double bottom at 76K, or if it holds at 73K, okay, I think we can at least work with that. It's easier to work with that. At the end of the day, it's easy to get frustrated with sort of looking at different outcomes. Remember, no one actually controls the market, right? Just because you want something to happen, or just because I want something to happen, doesn't mean it's going to happen. I don't like, necessarily being the altcoin villain and always calling for altcoins to bleed against Bitcoin and calling for Bitcoin dominance to just go higher tirelessly for 3.5 years. But you have to remember that the market does not always give you what you want to happen. If it did, we would have had 20,000 alt seasons over the last 3.5 years, because that's what everyone keeps calling for. And it just keeps not happening. So I'm just trying to lay out what I think, can happen and what are the most likely outcomes. And that's why we talked about weakness sort of in the February to March timeframe between March OPEX, which was, a week ago. Now we've had some renewed strength since then. Maybe sort of another smaller window of weakness as we get out into like early to mid-April, right? Early to mid-April. Beyond that, I think what could happen is it could raise people to say, oh, sell and man go away, right? But you have to remember that a lot of times when people say sell and man go away, it's because the markets are already down. And so what ends up happening usually is the markets then rip back up after all the sell and man go away guys sell, right? I mean, look at 2023. I mean, a lot of people were saying back then, right, sell and man go away, and then in June the market ripped back up. Okay? Even over here, right? In 2024, the market dropped into late April. And everyone was like, oh, it's May, sell and man go away. And then the market ripped higher in May. So remember that when the death cross occurs, if and when it occurs, there's going to be a lot of headlines about it. But know that a lot of times we get local lows within a few days of that. Okay? Now, I don't know exactly when it's going to happen. I guess we could take a closer look and sort of forecast this out. But if we just look here at Bitcoin on the daily time frame, and we load on here the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average, and we just kind of, project this out. It's not going to follow that exactly, but let's just assume it does. Interpolation's okay, extrapolation is not. So don't do this at home. But you're looking about, the first or second week of April, right? I mean, I don't know exactly where it's going to fall, and it's going to depend on price action between now and then too. I mean, if the price rips higher, then it's possible the 50-day doesn't even cross the 200-day moving average. But this is something that I would certainly watch here, is that when you get this, if there's another drop in the market, regardless of how low it goes, there will likely be a counter trend rally. Then that rally could resolve to a higher high if we don't really go that much lower, or if it's like a double bottom, or resolve to a lower high if Bitcoin goes into the 60s, right? Especially the low 60s. I could even look the other way if it's like 69K, but if it's like 63K, it's going to be hard to ignore. It'd be hard to ignore that if it comes all the way back down here. And so that's what I'm thinking. And the reason I bring 63K up is because that's exactly what that would correspond to if it were to test that structure, which it probably will at some point in the future. But it doesn't mean it has to be tested immediately. Maybe it comes down, bounces up, and then tests it later on this year. But that's generally what I'm thinking. I just want to provide some thoughts about the death cross coming up, and what my thoughts are surrounding it, and kind of anticipating what people might be talking about in a week or two. And I'm guessing they're going to be talking about the death cross. And if there's a drop in the market, they're going to be talking about the death cross even more. And just recognize that if that occurs, usually there's a low around the time of that death cross. And depending on how low the price is at that time would sort of give us some insight into the fate of the next rally, whether it's a rally to a new high or just a counter trend rally to a lower high. I still go back to this whole 2019 stuff, because I know that sounds crazy. QT is still going on, just like 2019. And back then, you basically just had, you sort of had these lows, and then you had a rip higher back up to the 200-day moving average, and then it ultimately came back down, and then it went back up again, right? So you had this type of structure, right? And then ultimately you got a recession. QE came back, lower interest rates came back, and then alt season finally occurred. But I still think we're a little bit, we're somewhat removed from that, especially given, where all Bitcoin pairs are and where ETH is with respect to its regression band and whatnot. It seems like that process is still potentially a little bit off into the future. But anyways, guys, those are my thoughts on the market. Let me know how the audio sounds. Hopefully the video today was better than normal. It seems like about every video I see people kind of complaining. And then the reason is because I used to work on by the way, if anyone out there is using an excuse they don't have a fancy microphone and video cameras, it's the reason not to start a YouTube channel. All of my videos and basically everything for the last 3 years have been recorded on this MacBook Pro. All right, I'm not doing a paid promotion for Apple, believe it or not, but all of them were. And don't use that as an excuse, right? Now, I mean, I'm still on a Mac, but at least it's not a laptop. But because of that, people used to complain about the laptop all the time, and then I finally figured out all the settings that made people happy. Now I've got a new system, and it's just hard to be bothered to figure out all the settings I need to change. So I'm slowly, figuring out what works for this and hoping that people are satisfied. So let me know. What I'd really like to know is the audio better today than it was yesterday? Because I actually made a small change. And then I also like to know if you prefer the video where it is right now. Would you prefer it over here? Some people say they want it down here, but I don't really like that. I'm thinking somewhere up high, but maybe it needs to be shrunk down some. That's what I'm not sure about. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll try to adjust that to make everyone happy. But anyways, guys, we're gonna wrap it up there. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.